We appreciate our audience joining us today and our sponsors as well. We want to recognize the series sponsors for their support and partnership to help us produce these sessions covering a range of key topics for the current advanced energy landscape. Constellation is our voltage sponsor, an Exelon company. Constellation has been with us from the beginning. We also thank Nuclear Powers Maryland for their participation as a sponsor for the series. And Siemens, one of our partners, Siemens Ingenuity for Life, is making great things happen in the energy space. We want to particularly thank Anton Cohen and the team at Cohnreznick for sponsoring the overall speaker series as our power sponsor. And it's my pleasure today to welcome our special guests for the program. Full bios of all of our speakers can be found online at mdcleanenergy.org/speaker series. This session, entitled Innovation Ahead, will focus on advanced energy and carbon emission reductions and how cutting-edge technologies and products will help make our world a different place in the future. We have an excellent panel, as you can see, but our moderator is somebody pretty special to me. Kevin Brown is a senior partner at Hobbs & Town, Inc. Kevin is a product of Drexel University's mechanical engineering program, a competitive mountain biker, a mediocre golfer and wakeboarder, as he says. He loves muscle cars and motorcycles. He's a father of 3 and loves to travel. But Kevin is an expert in executive search and the unique perspective of having worked with some of the best known companies in the world, including Pfizer, NRG, Johnson & Johnson, BP, FMC Corporation, and Saudi Aramco, among others. He has 25 years of experience of executive search in a variety of industries, from energy, petrochemicals, advanced materials, and industrial manufacturing, food, ag, bio, pharmaceuticals, and technology, and has worked on a variety of leadership searches for Fortune 100 and startup clients, as well as venture capital and private equity firms. Kevin splits his time between Hobbs & Town's Philadelphia headquarters and its Houston location, where he has been expanding the firm's footprint. I assume you're wearing cowboy boots, Kevin. He is passionate about the industry and a founder of and chairman of the Clean Tech Alliance of the Mid-Atlantic. He's been an advisory member of the Maryland Clean Energy Center for I can't say how long. So Kevin, thank you for agreeing to be our moderator today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to chair this outstanding panel as its moderator. I think what we've seen over the last couple of years in the energy space, and specific to advanced energy and renewable energy, has been really incredible. Just a few data points. I have been an executive recruiter for, as Kathy just mentioned, longer than I care to admit, but this is my 29th year. And I've spent the last 19 of those years with Hobbs & Town, which we've been in the renewable energy search business for 24 years. Next year will be our 25th year in the space. And we have not seen growth in this sector like we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years. It's really been incredible. In a given year, our firm conducts 200 to 300 searches a year. That was our average over a period of years. And then leading into 2019, 2020, we saw a market jump in our search work, mostly being driven by the movement to clean energy and away from carbon emissions. Last year during the pandemic, despite being closed down essentially for 40 days, we had a record year in terms of the amount of searches that we did and the amount of revenue that we produced from those searches. We thought leading into last year's election that things were going to calm down after the election, and our business jumped again over 60%. So we've expanded dramatically in the market, and that's being driven by both investors coming into the space heretofore that had not invested in clean energy, and the overall growth of the sector, which I think has been exceptional. One of the panelists is going to touch on a couple of key topics here, but one of the things that we have seen is the electrification that's taken place in the consumer automobile market is now starting to make its way into the commercial vehicle market. But the interim step is there's been huge growth in renewable fuel demand because we've all seen the Amazon trucks in our neighborhood during COVID go from 1 or 2 visits a day to 5 to 10, or so it seems. So what I'd like to do is just introduce our panelists. We have Karim Kuzami from Baltimore Gas and Electric, which is the CEO of BG&E. Thomas Keppy from Siemens Energy. Carol Lane, who's head of government affairs for XEnergy. Dave Buemi, EVP of Business Development with Energy Materials Corp. And Anton Cohen, partner and renewable energy industry leader with Cohnreznick. Karim, I'll start with you. Can you provide a little bit of an overview of your background and some key comments on what you're seeing in the space?
Sure. So let me first say thank you for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Karim Kuzami. I am president and CEO of BG, and I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. As a utility, we are confronted almost daily with the impacts of climate change. As we all know, superstorms are becoming more the norm, and the investments that BG is making in our gas and electric systems become all the more important. We know the safety and protection of our customers, their business, and the grid is literally in our hands. In addition to continually meeting our high standards for safety and maintaining service, we're also uniquely positioned to make a real impact going forward. And that's why BGE is taking bold and innovative steps to help address and reverse the clear and present dangers of climate change. Along with our parent company, Exelon, our Path to Clean initiative is creating a cleaner and safer planet. We're doing this by committing to reducing by 50% by 2030 and achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions from our operations by 2050. Our focus is to really walk the walk first and focus on our own operations, energy efficiency in our buildings, modernizing our gas infrastructure, investing in modern equipment, and electrifying our own vehicle fleet. We are well on the way, and as an example, kind of based on building off what Kevin just mentioned, we've replaced more than 200 vehicles with cleaner electric and hybrid vehicles and other equipment. When we hit our goal, we will have reduced more than 270,000 metric tons of emissions, which is the equivalent to nearly a full year's use of electricity for 50,000 homes. We're also funding EV solutions in low and middle income areas and building charging infrastructure for school, bus programs, and the electrification of bus transportation. This is also so very important because while the right to fill our lungs with healthy air should be universal, it is not. According to the Lung Association's State of the Air report, people of color are 61% more likely to live or work in areas with the most polluted air. Close to 20.7 million people live in areas that failed all 3 measures of pollutants studied by the report. And of those more than 20 million people, 14 million people are people of color. Right now, the air is literally healthier in wealthier neighborhoods, and that is not okay. At BGE, we've always been committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's clear that energy is an equity issue. But it's also clear that if we continue to work together and make the right decisions, we can build a brighter future together. So again, thank you for including me today, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Karim. Thomas, would you like to go next?
Sure, and also thank you very much for having me on the panel today. I've been in the energy industry for just over 18 years in different locations around the world. Today I represent Siemens Energy, pure play in the energy industry today. Siemens actually has been in the US for a long period of time. Actually in 1891, Siemens opened its first US production facility in Chicago. Siemens Energy, as of last year, spun off from Siemens and is now an independently managed and independently traded company focused purely on the energy side. In the US, we're headquartered in Orlando with about 10,000 US employees and 84 US locations, including 26 production sites. Our products that we offer cover the entire energy value chain. This includes generation, transmission, onshore and offshore wind, and of course, production and utilization of hydrogen, which is one of the areas that we wanted to focus on today in our panel. Whether it's moving electrons or molecules across a value chain, we have the expertise to do so and to support our customers in the transition. We've been investing heavily in electrolyzers to produce hydrogen. So we have our own technology using PEM electrolysis, where you take water and electricity to produce hydrogen and oxygen. And this is really an important technology for deep decarbonization when we really look at long-term storage. 2/3 of Siemens Gamesa, which is our wind turbine manufacturer, is owned by Siemens Energy, and it's the #1 global offshore wind manufacturer in the world. We are very passionate in supporting our customers as they transition to a more sustainable world. It's a really important time for us when we do so. In the US, 1/3 of the power generation equipment found is from Siemens Energy, and we support that every day to keep the lights on. So thank you very much, and looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you, Thomas. Carol Lane, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks. If you could leave this slide up for a minute. I'm very pleased to be here today and look forward to the discussion. XEnergy is a nuclear reactor and fuel design company that was actually started in Greenbelt, Maryland in 2009. When I joined in 2015, we had about 12 people. And today we're in Rockville, Maryland. We've just topped 220 people. We actually hired about 140 people during COVID and have moved about half of our hirees to the Maryland area to work for us. So we're pretty excited about that. Last October, we won a $1.2 billion contract from the Department of Energy. It's a 50-50 cost share. And we have to raise another $1.2 billion, but this will be used to build the first advanced nuclear reactor in the state of Washington. And I'll get into that in a minute. But to put some perspective on it, today, nuclear energy makes up about 82% of the clean energy in the state of Maryland, with that nuclear energy coming from Exelons Calvert Cliffs plant. If you could put up the next slide. I just wanted to show you guys that we're talking about different kind of nuclear plant. This is our fuel form. It's a pebble. So we're building a high temperature gas cooled pebble bed reactor. Inside of this pebble is about 17,000 coated particles. And each of those coated particles, which you can see the little dots in the center, contain a piece of uranium fuel. So this actually becomes the containment for our fission material as we go forward in utilization in the plant. Next slide, please. So just again, so these pebbles go into a reactor core. About 220 pebbles go into the core. And instead of using water in our reactor, we actually use helium, an inert gas. So the helium comes through, but over the pebbles, goes into the turbine and creates either electricity or process heat. So I just wanted to give you a little feel for this isn't your father's or grandfather's nuclear reactor. Next slide. The reason we're building this plant in the state of Maryland, as in the state of Washington, is because they passed a clean energy bill in 2019, which required them to get off coal by 2026 and be a carbon-free grid by 2045. So Energy Northwest, the utility out there, had an independent study conducted, and basically they came to the conclusion that they needed new nuclear to make up for the 25% of coal and gas that were currently being produced. So they partnered with us for this program with the Department of Energy, and that's where our first site will be deployed in 2027. I did want to make two quick comments, next slide please, on nuclear energy and pairing it with renewables. The first is that our reactor can load follow, and that means that we can go from 100% power generation down to 40% in less than 15 minutes and then back up to 100%. So this allows flexibility for utilities to pair with intermittent fuel sources. And then secondly, as we look towards retiring fuel plants, we really have a mismatch of the plants that are retiring, which are largely in the Northeast, the Midwest, and Mid-Atlantic, and the ideal places for generating solar and wind, which is in the West and the Great Plains area. And so it becomes, it's not that simple to just swap out a solar facility for a coal facility in some locations. So for example, I think Maryland's got 6 coal plants that are retiring in the next decade. And to replace one coal plant would require about 56 square miles for a solar energy plant. So it just gives you a perspective of, particularly in the state of Maryland, that's a small state, what kind of impact it has. And then finally, if you go to the last chart, just to talk about energy density and the power of a pebble, one of these pebbles can power an electric vehicle for 98,640 miles. That would take you around the circumference of the Earth 4 times, or 2/3 of the way to the moon if you're heading there. So with that, I thank you. I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Carol. Fascinating. It certainly provides good perspective. Thanks for your comments there. Dave Buemi from Energy Materials, would you like to go next?
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dave.
Okay, so it's an exciting time in the industry as far as innovation goes. I'm not going to go through any slides right now. I mean, real quick, my background, I've been 24 years in the solar energy industry. I've worked throughout the supply chain from way upstream where I am now, commercializing new technology, to engineering and procurement and construction, to all the way downstream to developing projects, project finance, et cetera. So I've got a pretty broad lens on the industry. I got into this industry after reading a number of different things, including the seminal Limits to Growth, which is not a widely distributed document, but it basically was, when it was done by MIT back in the 70s, it showed the kind of mess we were getting into with population growth getting above 6 billion. Right after I got into the solar industry, I met a number of people that were from the scientific community involved with something called SERI, which was now called the National Renewable Energy Lab. And they basically said, yes, silicon solar panels are interesting, but they will never scale. And that always stuck in the back of my head. And here we are now, starting in 2019, as the recognition that the climate is collapsing, and there was a lot more solar demand 2019, 20, and now into 21. Solar industry immediately starts having supply chain problems, and it's, you know, it's not the COVID thing. It's the complexity of it. It's the you know, it takes 3 years to add a silicon refinery to create the base silicon material, and a number of other things. So that's had me involved in a couple different solar startups, involved with how to do panel manufacturing at a significantly lower cost via simplified manufacturing that has super high throughput and no material bottlenecks. So I signed on with Energy Material Corporation 5 years ago, first as an advisor, and then now as a full-time employee with the founder, with a model that centers around printing the entire solar module at high speed using all American materials, which is essentially earth abundant chemicals, partnered with Kodak and Corning. Kodak has the printing machines that happen to work really well for our process. They were used previously for any of us older people on the call here, for Ektachrome, Kodachrome, that may remember those trade names, and with a dominant photographic film. Those machines are what we've repurposed. And Corning's a close partner because they're just a glass innovation company extraordinaire, and also happen to have experience printing glass. Essentially, we are launching a new product next year, and it's 50% lower cost than a crystalline module, and our factories cost a 95% lower CapEx to build after we start building new factories outside of the Kodak facility where we're located. And I will stop there.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave. Very, very helpful. Anton, I'm really excited to hear your comments. Please go next.
I appreciate it. Don't get too excited though. Happy to be here, and always our pleasure to be a sponsor of MCEC. We go way back. I used to be on the board many years ago, and Kathy is a dear friend of ours, and she does such a wonderful job. You know, Cohnreznick is one of the largest accounting and advisory firms in the country. What makes us unique is that we have probably over 100 folks. All we do is sort of clean energy. And I would say the bulk of what we do, besides traditional accounting services, audit, tax, valuation, and so forth, is we help companies structure their deals through project financing vehicles. As we all know, this industry is heavily tax incentivized and have many different renewable energy tax credits. So companies need to understand and navigate the complexities of the U.S. federal tax code. That being said, what I am very excited about, especially over the last couple of years, is you've seen many more innovative technologies slowly start to come to market, and whether that's battery storage, whether it's carbon capture technologies, you know, EVs making a much bigger push, and obviously green hydrogen, which many folks right now are obviously banking on significant opportunities in that space. It's exciting to see, you know, new technologies. We can't just rely on, you know, renewable energy from the standpoint of solar, wind, and others to get to total electrification or meet our reduced carbon footprint goals. We need all these innovative technologies to get there. And that creates other opportunities through research and development and other areas to really grow as we're part of this energy transition. What I've also seen over the last couple of years is, you know, this intersection between ESG, the environmental social governance, broader strategy of companies and their desire to reduce their carbon footprint. We've spent a lot of time working with large corporates who are not just making, and many of these corporates, the Fortune 500, have pledged to be net carbon zero by, you know, whether it's 2030 or 2035. It's that they're not just making accretive financial investments, but they're also powering their stores, and they're giving back to the communities, whether to create new jobs, different programs. And it's amazing. I think Karim talked about it a little bit earlier, just the same way you need access to clean, affordable housing, you need access to clean, affordable, and reliable power. And I think you'll see through the infrastructure plan and the Build Back Better plan, a lot of social impact investing that's going to take place. And we're all able to help these low and moderate income communities get access to clean, affordable power through different technologies. So that's what we're very passionate and excited about. Our firm has a long history working in the affordable housing space and low income housing, but it's that intersection, that cross section with the clean, affordable power as well. So I will stop there and look forward to the discussion today.
Excellent. Thank you, Anton. We put together in advance of the session today, we put together some general questions, which I'm gonna highlight for the panel, and then some individual questions for each of the panelists. But I would encourage everyone, we see the questions coming in. Please continue to submit your questions and we'll do our best to get to them and get them to the panelists. I guess the first general question I have for the panel is what are the key barriers that need to be removed for the nation and the state to successfully capture the opportunities associated with commercializing clean tech innovation? Kareem, do you want to grab that one first?
Sure. I would say there's probably two barriers that immediately come to mind. The first, on the financial side, is that we really need clean technology to be economically incentivized in the same way that we incentivize or make easier to access traditional energy tech. It's going to continue to operate at a deficit since it is new, and there's the inertia and the need to replace the incumbent technologies. So you do need the incentivization at the beginning. The second is from a resource perspective. Right now, there is a barrier for many people to access working on the new technologies or in the energy field. So we need to find ways to create and provide opportunities for people who haven't traditionally had a chance to work in our field, come and join our field and start to work on these new technologies. We are a big believer at BG. I'm a big believer that the more diversity you have in terms of thought, backgrounds, experience, the more diversity you have working on a problem or an issue, the better results you're going to get, the faster we're going to advance on the technology side here. So we need to get more people involved, people from areas that have not traditionally been involved in our industry.
Thank you very much. Any of the other panelists want to comment on that? Thomas?
Yeah, sure. I can add, I mean, definitely the economics is a driver, as mentioned as well. I mean, right now with renewable, I mean, it's not necessarily, let's say, an energy source that's dispatchable. And so we need a mix in the end. So we have to have something that is dispatchable that we can marry together with renewables so that we can always have the reliable energy that we need. I guess I also want to add, you know, we have to scale up these technologies, right? So today's perspective of, you know, the economics and the technologies has to change, right? And that comes with investment, with people who are trained on these technologies to find the new ones, right? So the technologies that we see today aren't going to be the technologies in 10 years that will solve the problem, but they will help us to find those, right? So it's really important that we invest, we have the right people, we have the right time, we give them the time to find the solutions, and then we support them also with the economics so that we can deploy these and use them.
So,
go ahead, David.
Yeah, so you know, I'm fairly terrified right now of where we're heading when it comes to the emissions free energy stack, because we're locking in around the world on current technology, kind of following up on where Thomas was just talking about. And that technology lock-in, yes, we need to deploy like crazy, given how quickly the climate's collapsing. But looking at, like, if you look at the EU's green stimulus program that they put out, I mean, they cut out all innovation funding. There is none in there. And the challenge is that without government industrial policy to support new innovation and new innovation manufacturing, et cetera, which we've had a dearth of for the longest time in this country when it comes to energy, the finance community does not pile in. And I can tell you, just with what we've been doing financing this company, it's been really difficult up until the last couple of years. And it was almost always pointed to, you know, there's just not a lot of support, especially for solar, because solar is looked at as, you know, oh, you already put coal out of business, you're about to put natural gas out of business. Why do you need innovation support, right? It's just, but the recognition there is not there, that there's that locking into this, you know, the current technology, we're already seeing the problems of it not being able to scale, reducing costs low enough. I mean, for solar, just as an example, and I'll stop here, but solar needs to be all in installed at the install level, all in cost of roughly below 40 cents a watt. If we are to get to where we're installing 500 gigawatts per year capacity globally, and right now we're at $1 per watt, sort of. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's a very important perspective, right? Solar's been around. People think, well, there's no need to evolve solar or to continue to invest in innovation in that area, and it's actually just the opposite, right? It's kind of counterintuitive in terms of where things are at. I would ask Carol to comment next because this perfectly dovetails into XEnergy's work.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say, I'd like to amplify on 2 points. I think that financial incentives and the government involvement is very important, particularly for a first of a kind facilities or plants that people build. I mean, right now there are probably about 24 advanced nuclear energy companies out there across the country, including Bill Gates's company, TerraPower. And, it's everybody, or there are lots of people who want to be the second or third buyer, but nobody wants to be the first buyer of a facility. And so that becomes very important in terms of really trying to get, your first plant deployed. And, nuclear does have obviously a bit of a stigma to it from over the past 30 years where we really haven't built nuclear plants. And so I think recognition of what's changed, what's innovative, how it can play with other clean energy sources is another issue that I think needs to be dealt with. Nuclear Powers Maryland did a poll, which was kind of interesting. As I mentioned, 82% of the clean energy comes from the one nuclear plant in the state of Maryland, and only about 52% of the people actually thought nuclear was a contributor to clean energy. So I think there's also an education, at least in our case, an education process of what's changing and what's new and innovative, in the particularly with small nuclear reactors.
Excellent. Thank you, Carol. Anton, do you have any comments that you'd like to add on the topic?
Yeah, I think what Thomas said is spot on as far as getting to scale and be able to dispatch. I think folks get a little, sometimes they think clean energy has been around quite some time. And from my perspective, I've been saying it for the last 10 years, we only scratching the surface here, right? We're really at I wouldn't say the beginning of innovation, but we're not that much further past that. We've made some great strides in some key technologies like solar and wind and biomass and other things, anaerobic digesters and so forth. But there is so much more to do when you compare to traditional energy sources, that in order for us to really scale, besides getting government incentives involved in different loan programs, as we'll probably talk a little bit about later, we need representation from all communities throughout the country, right? And that's why you're seeing a recent announcement from Microsoft, who just entered into one of the first environmental social justice power purchase agreements, where the pressure that's been put on these companies by their shareholders or stakeholders and customers to reduce their carbon footprints grows every single day. And large infrastructure funds and private equity firms and investors are making sure that the companies they're going to invest in are really on top of meeting these standards, right? Whether environmental, social, governance, you name it, a combination of all three. So I think that the optimism is there. I think there's a lot of stakeholders that want to get there, but until we create some type of government program, it's nice to invest hundreds of billions of dollars and have incentives there, but it's got to be on more of a systematic basis where there's a long-term outlook that we can all really, so we're all able to get more comfortable with investing in these technologies for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've seen, so we've done quite a bit of work for General Fusion over the years, right? And I've worked with them for 11 years. That's kind of hard to say. But, you know, initially it was, hey, this is a different approach. It's fusion, it's not fission. And I was amazed at the mindset in general, in terms of fusion versus fission and sort of the US centric mindset of all that. Thomas brought up a couple of important points, and I think I was expecting someone on the panelists to touch, one of the panelists to touch on this issue. We've worked a little bit with folks in the hydrogen space, and the challenges and difficulty associated with hydrogen or small nuclear, the regulations and the permitting and the requirements that are in place have been in place in some cases for over 50 years. And there's been no evolution of that at all in many cases, either nationally or at the state level, to embrace new clean energy technology and innovation as it relates to hydrogen permitting, for example, right? If you're going to produce hydrogen somewhere, it's a very difficult process to get a new facility built. Moving on, I think it's important to touch on the importance of technologies evolving. So can I pose to the panel, can we talk a little bit about why it's important for these technologies to continue to grow and evolve in the clean energy space? Go ahead.
Kevin, I can start, I guess, and I'm sure others will build on this. And I think Dave mentioned this, but the simple comment is the existing technology we have today is just not going to get us where we need to be. Until clean technology, things like battery storage and electric vehicles are economical for most people or for the most use cases, this is really going to be an uphill battle. So we need to continue to invest in new technology. We need to improve on existing technology. And by doing that, costs will come down, leading to more widespread adoption. That's really where this is all going to change and really take hold. And we're going to see an exponential growth in terms of the use of these new technologies, helping us to achieve those broader and more ambitious clean air goals that many states and the country in general and companies have all put in place.
Excellent, thank you. Go ahead, Thomas.
Sure, I can add to that. I guess one thing that I've learned in my journey so far in my career is often when we're looking at new technologies, we have these perceptions of constraints, right? Something doesn't work, it's impossible. And what's really exciting is when you actually start to work on it, you start to dissolve these constraints or these limitations that you perceive are there. And that's what has to happen with clean technologies, clean energy technologies. We need to really focus to dissolve these constraints, these things that are preventing us from taking it to the next step. And that really requires a collaborative effort, you know, and I'll mention hydrogen here specifically as something very exciting because it has the ability of coupling different sectors. So from industry to mobility to energy, this form of energy, I think, is really exciting because it really can bring together many different industries, their investments and their energy in really moving us forward in clean energy. So it really will take our effort, our ingenuity, our innovation really to get there so that the economics make sense and so that we can scale this technology to, you know, the scale that's needed so that we can, you know, offset some of the, you know, the fossil assets that we're relying on today.
Thomas, can you comment a little bit about the applications of hydrogen and where you are seeing it being used today and potentially in the future, just briefly?
Yeah, I mean, it will follow the economics, right? So, I mean, you can go and see many different studies and how it progresses. But I'd say in general, what we'll see is, you know, the industry that's already using hydrogen they'll be, the early adopters of cleaner forms of hydrogen, right? And then we see in the mobility industry, so heavy transport, we do see a lot of movement there. And then it will follow, and probably ending actually with energy. And that's just because, especially I'll say in the US, we have with natural gas, we have really inexpensive energy today. And so that's what will prevent us or putting it in that order. I mean, right now, if you compare, let's say for a combined cycle power plant, if you were to compare a natural gas powered plant to one that's co-fired with hydrogen, I mean, the economics, they're just off right now to be able to compare them. But, with incentives to scale the production of hydrogen and, with other mechanisms like a carbon tax, at one point, they will be equal, but that won't happen for let's say about a decade roughly. But as we scale up clean hydrogen as a whole, we're going to see some of these other industries to be the early adopters. Industry and mobility, I would say, will be the first.
Excellent. Thank you. Anton, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just gonna to add on to what Karim said. I think he's spot on with, in order to get to widespread adoption, costs obviously need to come down, and they need to be economical to, when it comes to certain newer technologies on the EV side or battery storage. I do think though that although we want to see costs come down, the amount of pressure right now that we're seeing, I mean, every time you look around, there's a new clean energy fund that's being created. The appetite there is to invest in new clean energy products, whether it's software or infrastructure. And I think that demand is putting a lot of pressure on folks to adopt much quicker and scale up their R&D. To do that, because it's now, companies are being penalized in certain regards here for not having a clear path forward from a reduced carbon footprint standpoint. So I think the pressure from these large investors, institutions, funds here is, and combined with the costs hopefully coming down, it makes the advancements in new technologies even more important, right? You got to continue to evolve to keep your investors happy, your customers happy, and obviously your stakeholders as well.
Thank you. Perfect. That was a perfect segue into my question for Carol. Carol, can you talk a bit about the traditionally low cost of natural gas, although it's risen quite considerably over the last several months, has made the concept of building new nuclear plants seem uneconomical. Can you talk about why small modular reactors would now make that very feasible, and where the advantages are in terms of a cost as a source of electricity?
Sure. So probably if you look at, and there are 2 large nuclear plants being built in Georgia today, which are, I think the cost of them are like $14 billion or something. It's rather high. So I think the small modular reactors have really taken a very different approach. And that is, one is the overall size. So our individual modules are 80 megawatts, and our most economical is a 4-pack. Which is 320 megawatts of electric. So I think size has to do with that. Also, being able to construct things in a smaller size. So we're looking at every component that we use for our reactor to be road transportable, to be able to be built in a factory and shipped to the site, as opposed to building everything on site that has been done in the past. We're also looking at, and a lot of the advanced nuclear companies are doing this, where you have the nuclear island, which is focused on the materials that really need the nuclear safety certifications for, and then the conventional island, which will allow you to use potentially turbines and steam generators and things like that, that are similar to what's being used for coal plants or natural gas plants. So there's a combination of things between road transportability, being able to modularize the reactors and build them sequentially and build it up. So you start generating power before you have to wait till the last one's finished. And the ability to use, not have everything specialty built, we believe will allow us to be cost competitive with natural gas as we move forward in the future.
Great, thank you for that. Dave, can you address the topic of China and how it's sort of becoming the OPEC of renewable energy, with a huge concentration of solar, wind representing 65%, and then obviously energy storage device, specifically batteries, almost 70% of them are now coming from China. Can you talk to the positive and negative effects of that from a supply chain perspective?
Yeah, such an interesting topic, and I love whoever coined that. You know, China is now the OPEC of renewable energy, because it's so true. You know, this started, I'll get to the question, but this started as a all very scrappy renewable energy industry years and years ago, taking on a highly subsidized fossil fuel supply chain, and huge imbalance in subsidies and grid access and all kinds of stuff, right? So we were very happy to take product that would come from China at a lower cost without not thinking through the consequences of where that could end up. And China has shown, you know, over the years, just, you know, blatant anti-competitive actions, where as other solar technologies, other countries started ramping up, they would just drop the price and lose money, because that's the way their political or their governmental system is set up, right? They, you know, as something that a conversation in a panel I was involved in previously, you know, it's basically China treats CapEx as a sunk cost. So for them, it's no big deal. This challenge now is, what's happened is they put everybody out of business with that anti-competitive behavior, and they own 93% of all solar panels made in the world come from there. It's a huge problem, not just for us in the US, but globally, right? Because the concentration of that is creates this problem of, you know, especially as we are now into a supply constrained scenario, you know, they get to play God with who gets solar modules. And then you have all these other things you read about in the press around slave labor and, you know, the unequal subsidizing that they're doing in violation of WHO rules, et cetera. So the positive has been that they allowed the industry, the solar industry, to get to where it got to, and the kind of growth that it's been experiencing over the last 5 to 8 years has been fairly phenomenal. Could have never done that without Chinese subsidizing the solar panel industry. And the question comes, okay, so why can't other countries do this? The problem is that even with China's subsidy, the gross margin for a solar panel manufacturer right now is only about 12% at a good day or good year, and it's roughly hovers around 10%, which means operating profits are minimal to non-existent. So there's no other country willing to do this. We are, as a country, in some of the bills floating around Capitol Hill, looking to reshore that silicon supply chain manufacturing here with taxpayer money to take on China. The EU is trying to do that similarly with their green stimulus plan. I'm not sure how that's going to go, but it speaks to the, I'm segueing to the innovation theme here. It goes back to, again, the innovation that's required. The US has incubated through DOE and CO, the Solar Energy Technology Office, a number of different new technologies, including perovskite, which is by far the most promising, which is what my company works in. And we need to keep dollars going to these efforts, and not, like, we're kind of horrified that we're going to spend all this money to replicate a silicon supply chain here, when all China will do is just artificially drop their prices for the next couple of years, or it's going to take 5 years to build that here in the US, and then they will start dropping their prices. So long-winded answer, it was really great in the early days, and it's not so great right now with all the challenges that we have with China generally.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick comment there. One of the things that the pandemic showed our clients, specifically in the chemical industry, was that they were overly dependent upon China and Asia for that matter, for active ingredients, right? So over the last year, we have seen a significant change in investment and a North Americanization, if you will, of a lot of the chemical companies' supply chains in terms of building capacity here in North America, so that they weren't dependent upon China or Asia for specific ingredients to make products, right? It's pretty interesting. I'm going to switch over to Thomas for just a second. I want Thomas to share with us, if he could, a bit more about how Siemens is working with clean hydrogen to displace fossil fuel in your work with Duke Energy and Clemson. Can you share a bit more about that, Thomas?
Yeah, I'd love to share. It's actually a project I'm personally involved in. So it's a project where we're doing a conceptual study. So at Clemson, at the university, they have a combined heat and power, where they're using a small gas turbine to make steam really for the campus, both in the winter and in the summer to condition the air, in the summer for the air conditioning. And so I guess we're working together with Duke Energy, Clemson University, and Siemens to really support all of our decarbonization targets. So Clemson has a target to be net zero by 2030. Duke has 2030, they have to be 50%, and then 100% by 2050. And then Siemens Energy, we're really supporting our customers in their transition, with the technology, but we're also in our own plants also, we have a goal for 2023. But this project that we're working on is really looking at a hydrogen storage system. So it's essentially producing hydrogen, storing it, and then consuming it in the gas turbine in this case, as a overall system. And this is really a key technology when you look at that's really important for deep decarbonization. So as we decarbonize more and more, you actually go from short-term storage to long-term storage, right, or seasonal, because you need to meet the demands of grid from electricity, in this case also in steam. And so that really requires storage to become an important technology to be considered. And so what's really unique about this relationship is we have the off-taker, we have the asset owner of the CHP plant, as well as the technology owner really working together. And so this really helps us to understand the overall economics, because there's much more to learn than, let's say, the initial economics of how much a kilogram of hydrogen costs versus natural gas. How the system operates, how it's integrated into the grid, how it's dispatched. All of that information is really important to really understand the advantages of such a system. I do also want to highlight, partnership is key. So how we work together, understanding all of our interests to find the right technologies is really important. And this type of a team is key in really understanding that. So very exciting opportunity. We're looking at how we can progress this, how we can move it forward. But I think it's a really good project that we can then share and scale across the US.
Great, thank you for that. Kareem, can you talk about Exelon and BG&E and their commitment of investing $10 million over the next 10 years with combined with in-kind services of equal value through the 2C2I Climate Initiative?
Sure. So the Climate Change Investment Initiative, or what we call the 2C2I, as you mentioned, is a 10-year, $20 million commitment to invest in and really cultivate innovative startups focused on advancing climate change mitigation, adoption, and resiliency efforts. We've been focusing on businesses that are within the Exelon company's footprint, so obviously a lot in Maryland here at home. In the last 2 years, we've invested in 19 startups that have showed some real promise. These companies vary from a compost pickup business to a company that uses algae to produce an oil replacement, to companies creating affordable solar and battery options for public housing developments. One example, and I'll use this, and I'll go through it a little bit more in detail, that's based here in Maryland, is ATP Maryland, and that's an African-American owned and Maryland-based startup. They use two innovative, patented, and cost-effective processes that generate multiple environmental benefits from specially bred crops and their resulting materials, or basically biomass. The startup's vertical biocrop farms capture CO2 from large emission sources, and its crops, when planted in brownfield sites and vacant lots, can filter the atmospheric pollutants, as they also remove the contaminants in the soil. The company's field tests have proven the crop's ability to also remove excess nutrients from the Chesapeake Bay watershed farmlands to help improve the health of the bay's ecosystem. The goal of ATP Maryland is to really make a difference in Baltimore's under-resourced communities by creating a safer and healthier environment and creating new green manufacturing jobs, as it also advances the city's climate and sustainability goals. So really what we're doing through 2C2I is taking the things that a large company like BGE or Exelon has, the resources, the expertise, the experience, and bringing them to some of the smaller startups that are really doing some really neat and innovative things, and ensuring that they have the support so they can be successful. Because again, going back to our earlier discussion, these are the people where that are going to help us get to where we need to be. We need everyone thinking about all of these problems in different ways and trying to find the best solution so we can achieve our climate and sustainability goals.
Excellent. Outstanding. I mean, that's really exciting, especially for the entrepreneur who is, as we've seen, right, when you're a startup and you're not supported locally, it's very, very difficult to find funding. I mean, it is, especially when you're at that early stage. So it's nice to see Exelon and BGE stepping up. Speaking of private investment, Anton, can you talk a bit about the role of private investment in helping tech transfer make its way through to business development and ultimately to job creation? Anton, you're still on mute.
Apologies. I think a lot of this is going to be driven, we can all talk about the DOE and the different loan programs and different state level programs out there. I think a lot of this is obviously going to be driven through P3 initiatives, through the public-private partnerships. I think, I don't know if a lot of folks know this, but under the current House and Senate versions of the reconciliation package, there is a sort of proposal for a national climate bank where they would leverage, I think it's almost 28 billion of public funds. And when you think about leverage that amount of public funds, that's a significant investment. So when folks think about a national climate bank, we can all refer to a national green bank or clean energy accelerator. What this bank would do would leverage public and private investments to provide financing for projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and then also obviously will support clean energy technologies. So this proposal's been around for a while. We're not sure what's going to happen, if that's going to get trimmed down. But what you're seeing now to make really big inroads in the finance side of new technologies is going to be through a combination of private and public partnerships, right? I think that's where we're going to see a real dent made, because we're talking about enormous volume of dollars coming into different technologies. So, I mean, that's one example. The other example is, if you think about the current tax credits out there, there's a proposal for what we call a refundable tax credit. So, what that will do is it'll help, and it all depends on what technologies that gets assigned to. But instead of trying to find a large bank or a corporate investor to come into your renewable project, you'll now be able to use that sort of financing gap as a refundable credit. So, almost similar to maybe the grant days, many, many years ago, which should create opportunities for some smaller developers of technologies to able to create, new investments in the space. So I think it's, to answer your question more directly, Kevin, I think it really, although we'll see some smaller programs at different state levels, and we'll see them in Maryland, I think some type of federal policies or federal incentives where we can really leverage the private community, what's going to have the biggest inroad with these dollars being deployed.
Great. Would any of the other panelists like to comment on that topic as well?
Sorry, Kevin, I lost track of that. What was the initial question?
I said, would anyone like to comment on Anton's point that, this really needs help at the federal level? He referenced the National Climate Bank proposal.
Yeah, so I'm one of the hats I wear here is government affairs, and watching what's happening with the reference bills that Anton just talked about. And I think, I'm just going to make a blanket statement here that the federal government, as much as they're trying to create more capital availability at all levels, this piece around that I mentioned early on is around getting a fund that is much more focused on innovation. And we're spending so much money right now on investment tax programs to get deployment done. And the piece around not having enough innovation focus is still a real problem. I get that I'm one of these people that just, in the solar industry, there's two thoughts about investment tax credit. One is that it's the greatest thing since sliced cake. Look how much activity it spurred. The other side is it's so expensive to claim, and it is. And and if it had sunsetted down to like 10%, like it was originally going to, I mean, most people are like, we just won't even bother with 10%. It's too expensive to go to. So there's two things there. One is, how do you go to a simpler scheme, maybe a PTC that's easier to claim? The making it refundable, as you pointed out, Anton, is like, yeah, that makes it easier for cash flow, but there's still the requirements. But then the other piece is how do we balance that out with enough support for innovation when we've got Senator Manchin up there putting the screws to grants and things like that right now in these current bills. So any way that the federal government can increase the focus on early stage funding of technology, whether it's at the R&D level, and we have a great R&D level. We've always had a great R&D level incubator. We're really good at incubating new technology, new energy technology. But then what's happened in the past is that's all gone offshore to actually commercialize, because we haven't had that support to get over that valley of death and had that industrial policy. And I think while there's some measures in this bill, these various bills are in there, we need a lot more focus on that. Sorry, that's sort of off topic, but
that's all right.
Kevin just went on mute.
Yeah.
Kareem, did you want to say something?
I was just going to build off what Dave said. I think that's the key thing, is that we have some new technology development, but it's really, we need to keep looking at how we can evolve the technologies and make them fit more use cases. We talked about trying to make things more affordable. That's important too. But you think about something like the smartphone that started out as a great device that gave us the opportunity to, make phone calls, surf the web. But now it's evolved, and now it enables long distance medicine, control of drones, financial transactions, a whole lot more than what it was originally designed for. And I think that can be the same thing that happens with a lot of the clean tech as we continue to evolve the technologies that we're developing. So I think funding needs to go towards that as well, so that we can continue to find more and more use cases and for the technologies that we're developing.
Great point. I mean, we've seen some really interesting companies emerge over the last 12 to 18 months that have been around for a long time, but because of the pressure on companies to be more ESG focused and conscious, right? We've seen some real drivers from both their customers and their shareholders and their boards to make significant change. One of the companies that we're working with up in New England, which has significant operations in Maryland, is a company called Divert that backhauls food waste. So they got the grocers to backhaul the food waste for them, and then they're composting it and using anaerobic digestion to produce biogas. But that's a company that kind of slid under the radar for years and years and years. But now with all of this pressure that's being driven by multiple factions, we've seen a real significant growth in that business. And they were invested in by a private equity fund that 2 years ago didn't exist. So pretty interesting the way these things are going. I'd like to change gears for a second. We have some questions coming from the folks that are on the webinar. And one of the questions from Claire Johnson, which I think is a great question that we haven't talked about, is what are your companies doing to help support the 1.2 gigawatts of offshore wind to be installed by 2025? Would anyone like to respond to that?
I mean, I can add from the technology side that we would be very glad to support any activity with offshore wind. I'd say we're very active. It's one of our key areas for Siemens Gamesa. We're continuing to evolve the technology, getting to larger turbine, larger radius to really improve the economics. And then maybe I'll address at the same time a question about let's say the footprint of the equipment. Siemens Gamesa has recently announced, I guess, the product for the offshore wind that the turbine blades can be recycled. So that's something in the past I know that has come up, that even though it's clean energy, recycling of some of the turbine blades is difficult. So that's something very important to all of us. And we have a product now where the turbine blades are recyclable.
And I would say from BGE, we don't own generation, so we don't own directly offshore wind, but obviously the infrastructure needed to bring that energy onshore, we are obviously very supportive of that. One of the things that we have a lot of investment in is our Workforce Collaborative program that really helps to find ready to work adults and help train them so that they can get jobs with either BGE or our contractors. And one big area is in the construction management area as well. So when you think about the resources needed to build those transmission lines to take that offshore wind onshore and be able to use it, that's going to require more resources. And just like everything else in the country right now, there's a lot of resource constraints. So continuing to populate the system, if you will, with people that can help do the work that is needed, that's something that we're committed to doing and supporting as well.
Thanks, Kareem. Anton or Dave, did you have comments?
Yeah, all I was going to say is, obviously our focus is all solar, but, living in Annapolis and Rochester now a little bit, but I think it would be great if we had potentially for all the participants of this panel, like how we can activate as a citizen lobbying, who are the main what are the main channels to lobby as as individuals with the state government, federal government, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is from a financing perspective. I mean, when you look at the offshore wind market, it's sort of dominated by a handful of large European companies, right, that have deployed offshore wind projects throughout Europe and now coming into the US. Obviously, the cost of offshore is extremely high, and for some of the smaller developers that want to do it, it's trying to get access to capital. So we're certainly trying to help companies finance these projects and help them navigate sort of some of the complexities of these tax credit structures. But I think to Dave's point, I think his idea would be great. It's with offshore, it's just been a combination of so many different factors, from permitting and environmental issues that have taken time to navigate. And now I think you'll start to see a bigger push over the next 5-10 years, but it's something that's going to take a little bit of time.
Excellent, thank you. Carol, there's a couple of questions for you. I'll start with the first one and then the second one, which is sort of related. The question is, what is the size of your $2.4 billion Washington State prototype? And then the second question is, what is the footprint of a smaller modular reactor versus a typical nuclear plant? So I guess there's two questions there that are really very closely related.
Okay. So first I would say our plant in Washington actually really isn't a prototype. It's actually going to be our first commercial plant. So its actual size and will be built as we would build additional plants. But the size of it would produce 320 megawatts of electricity. And as I said, made up of the 4 modules. And to compare size, so right now an existing nuclear plant needs a 10-mile radius around it. We basically, with the smaller footprint, we're a lot less complicated. We have 1/10 the components of the current plants. So basically, size-wise, we're, I guess a way to visualize it is to say our plant would fit, if from those of you in the Washington area, which I think most people are, between the Capitol and the Washington Monument. So it's significantly smaller, probably about maybe a quarter of the size of the footprint of a current plant.
Great, thank you. And then one of the other questions that came up is from Jim McDonnell, and he asks, given the dramatic run-up in natural gas, coal, and electricity prices here in the United States, and more so in Europe and Asia, is it possible that the renewable energy build-out is not far enough along, and we may be moving away too quickly from traditional forms of energy? Is more coordination needed? Interesting question.
So, I mean, I can start there. I'm sure others will want to weigh in, but I mean, part of what's going on is not about the energy transition or renewables. There's basic supply and demand problems, especially around natural gas, around the world, and the surge in economic activity tied to that from coming out of COVID. But I think, just as a broad comment, it's something that's really concerned me for a long time, is that the energy transition has been kind of an ad hoc process. It's not it's in region by region, state by state, country by country. It's not well communicated, and that's my concern, is that when you get right down to, like, Karim's ratepayers there that are his customers, from there all the way up there, I think there needs to be a really strong communication about what to expect, how long it's going to take, the hiccups that may happen, et cetera. Because otherwise we went into this place where there's these unknowns, like with this current energy crunch, where the politics set in and you've got one side saying, oh, this is the renewables again. It's like when, Texas had those big ice storms and it was immediately pinned on the wind turbines, when wind turbines were a minor part of what happened down there. So just my 2 cents on that question.
And I would build off what Dave said, and thank you, Jim, for the question. I think the piece of affordability has to come into everything we look at. And that's where I think when companies like my own, when we make declarations of we're going to be net carbon zero by X date, it's important to understand what the actual plan is. Is there a real plan behind that, or is it just a comment? And then look at that plan to see what it's going to do for costs and prices, and what reflection that's going to be in the energy bill. When you look at some of our customers, especially the low and moderate income customers, they have a significant portion of their wallet share that's tied up in the cost of energy, and dramatic increases in those costs is just something they cannot afford. So what is the plan to help them be able to still get the truly life-sustaining resource, which is energy? How are they going to still get it as we still move to a clean future? I don't think it means we have to slow things down. I do think, and I think this is the back part of the question, a collaboration and just a good view of what things are going to do going forward. I always talk about how the energy industry, we're more like a battleship. We're not a motorboat. It takes us a while to get things to kind of take hold and move in a direction. So we need 5, 10, 15-year plans so that we can really be thoughtful about what we're doing, and then also forecast what that's going to do to the bills, building in, things that could be unforeseen, like the pandemic coming out of it, global impacts as well, but making sure we have that capacity built in so that customers can continue to afford the service they need, and we can continue to provide that service.
Great, thank you. I guess from this point, I'd like to understand from the panelists if there's any general comments they want to make around what's next. As we all think about where we are today, coming out of the pandemic, hopefully, and moving forward, what's really next? We're facing obviously shortages of everything. The chip crisis is really hammering the automobile industry right now. But if we think about what's next, what's probably most important moving forward? And I'll just leave that as a general question.
Kevin, I think you've heard it. Okay, Carol.
I would just start by kind of bringing it up to the global level. I mean, I think as we talk about climate change, we're really, it is a global issue that we're all dealing with, and we're seeing, we have to balance what we're doing in this country from a time frame with what's going on in the rest of the world. And we're seeing that, for example, in our case, Canada is moving very aggressively to clean energy. They are moving very aggressively in nuclear, as well as other renewable and clean energy sources. We're seeing that in Eastern Europe and Africa and the Far East and the Middle East. And we do see, we were talking about China earlier, and China and Russia are moving into some of those markets. So I think we have to balance. We've got a lot of both education and transition that's going to be occurring in this country, but we have to balance that with, as we want to decarbonize on a global basis, how we can participate in that as well. Because it's going on simultaneously, and we're going to have to work a lot of these issues in parallel.
I'd agree with what Carol said. I was going to make a similar point. I'd add also that, I think it was Thomas talking about hydrogen, in terms of the affordability today. We need to continue to innovate and look at how we can use these different technologies in different ways, and things that may not be economical right now. We need to still continue to be willing to do pilots and invest and be ready so that when they do become economical, we are ready to move and utilize those. Because like I mentioned earlier, these things take time to operationalize and put in place. So we need to continue to invest, be willing to try things out, and then be ready to move when something does become viable.
So just from my standpoint, I think the one of the really large unspoken challenges that we need to, as industries, all these sectors within the energy industry, is to understand and start planning for, and this involves innovation, but how do we do a rapid growth of renewables while we have large climate resilience challenges coming at us, and a lot of them we don't even understand, because as bad as this year was around the globe, I'm not sure where it stops. And so this is coming up more and more, especially down at the deployment level. Where do you site projects? What are the supply chains for the projects? How vulnerable they are? And I just think that that's a place that I know people are talking about, but needs a lot more guidance and probably a lot more support from governments globally.
Because I'll add a little bit. I guess from what I see, really there's a mixture of technologies currently that are required. So it's not exactly clear which one, but depending on the state, the location, the town, the existing asset, the supply and the demand, various technologies could make sense, and that will change with time as well, as Kareem mentioned. So I'd say as regulation will influence clean energy more and more, as we invest in new technologies and see their potential to scale, that mixture of what is the right answer, I think is actually going to change significantly in the next period of time, much different than in the past, right? In the past, it was fairly clear, what made sense. And I'd say with the mixture and the trends today, I think that's not so clear at the moment, but I think something, hopefully with the support and the innovation, that will become a little bit more clear down the road.
Yeah, I just think one thing to add is that I think there's a lot of excitement around new technologies and innovation. To me, the biggest challenge is how do we deploy these technologies in those communities that need them the most, right? The low and moderate income communities. It's great that we got all these new innovative technologies, but those are the communities that needs access to this, as we talk about clean, reliable, affordable power, right? And we got to make sure that whether it's through social impact investing or other programs, that the communities that need it the most are able to receive the benefits from these new technologies that are created.
Great, thank you all. Kathy, did you want to make some comments?
I just want to say what a fabulous panel. What an excellent conversation. I just am grateful to all of you for your time today. Kevin, as always, you're the consummate moderator. I hate to end this because there's just so much more to talk about. We want to say in closing that we thank our audience and all of our panelists who participated in this speaker series. We want to make sure that our audience knows that we are preparing for the 2022 legislative reception to be held in Annapolis on Thursday, February 17th at the Governor Calvert House. And we will be hosting a hybrid event this year to allow for in-person networking as well as remote attendees. We hope to hear from guest speakers on climate and energy priorities under consideration for policy and regulation this year. Details will be available shortly on our website. If you're interested in more ways to stay connected with the Maryland Clean Energy Center, we can invite you to consider serving on our advisory council. We're currently accepting nominations through 2022 through November 5th for the 2022 advisory council, and more information will be available in the chat. To all of you on the panel, we know your time is valuable, and we're so grateful that you spent some of it with MCEC and our audience today. And we look forward to keeping in touch with you as innovation evolves in the future. So with that, that wraps our speaker series for 2021. Thanks again, everyone.